Robot Talk is the podcast that sits down with roboticists from around the world and asks them the questions you always wanted answered. Like, why don't more robots have tails? And how does that thing work? Hello everyone! Welcome to Robot Talk. I'm your host, Claire Asher, and this week's episode is about bio-inspired robotics. I'm finding out how one researcher's quest to develop more agile robots has led to new discoveries about one of the most impressive creatures in the animal kingdom, as well as new methods for studying and monitoring wildlife, and new insights into robotics. Before that, don't forget to support the podcast by signing up as a paid supporter on Patreon. Not only will you receive my eternal gratitude for helping the podcast to continue, but you'll also get access to lots of cool perks, including monthly bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes updates, merch discounts, and more. Check out patreon.com/Claire Asher and join the Robot Talk community today. So, with all that said, it's time for me to introduce this week's guest. I recently had a really interesting chat with Amir Patel from University College London about designing robots with the agility and manoeuvrability of a cheetah. This week, I'm speaking to Amir Patel, an associate professor at University College London, who's using robotic methods to research animal locomotion and then translating those insights into bio-inspired machines. Hi Amir, I'm excited to have you on Robot Talk.
Hi, thanks for having me, Claire. I'm excited as well.
So as I mentioned in your little intro, your research kind of has two strands to it. So let's take each one in turn. First of all, can you tell us a bit about how you're using robotic methods to understand and quantify animal movement?
So I guess a start to this is to understand that usually what people do is they do what's called bio-inspired robotics, where we have a biological system and we see some phenomenon or behavior or structure and we replicate that in a robotic system. So my story actually starts in 2012 when I started my PhD and I wanted to build a cheetah robot.
Yeah, it's nice and ambitious.
Very, very ambitious. This next generation, most amazing agile robot.
Yeah.
And I thought I would leverage tons of biological knowledge and models and data. But then, to my surprise, there actually wasn't much known about the cheetah and how it's able to be so agile and maneuverable. And that kind of led me to this idea where I thought, okay, can I use my techniques as a robotics engineer to understand the animal better? So we do that in my research group through a couple of mechanisms. So we model and I guess simulate the animal as a multi-body, a rigid body physics system. So we're trying to figure out what is the optimal or best way to do a particular movement. And what would be cool is if the movement lines up with what we see in the videos. So I do quite a bit of work on that, what's called optimal control. And then the other side is we also spend quite a bit of time developing, in a sense, physical models, but actually robots.
Right.
To understand things like in my PhD, I wanted to understand how it's using its tail. So without any biomechanics studies being done on the tail specifically, I built this physical robotic car, which allowed us to test, what happens when the tail flicks in the roll axis and the pitch axis, and then maybe a combination, and to see how that affects a body moving at very high speed. And then the other, I guess one of the parts I spent most of my time on is to try and ask, what is the real animal doing? And this was actually a lot more difficult than I expected because it's really difficult to obtain 3D kinematic data from a wild animal, that does what it wants to. It doesn't do a particular motion where you want it to. And so, I've spent quite a lot of effort developing methods on sensing and computer vision to capture the motion of these animals as they move. So it's cool because a lot of the times what ends up happening is we come up with techniques in robotics that can provide new insight and new tools for biologists, actually, which is great.
Yeah, fantastic. Your PhD was at the University of Cape Town, right?
Yes.
So that was a lot easier to access wild cheetahs than now you're at University College London.
Yes. Yeah, I know it was actually really convenient because I was based in Cape Town. I mean, I'm born and raised Cape Townian. And, just 20 minutes outside of Cape Town is a breeding center called Cheetah Outreach. And they were very kind to us and allowed us to come and observe the cheetahs because as part of the enrichment, the cheetahs, they have a little track where the cheetahs chase a piece of either like a rabbit pelt, or like a piece of reflective plastic around a track. And, it's good fun for the tourists, but also cool for us because we could place cameras around and we could do a 3D reconstruction of the motion. So, that was a great spot to be connected. And then also, we had a good partnership, or still have a good partnership, I should say, with South African national parks. It's called Sand Parks. And so there's a ton of national parks in South Africa where we could go and observe, actual wild animals. One of the field trips that I actually had the privilege of going on, we caught a cheetah catching a gazelle right in front of us, which was really, really cool.
Amazing.
So in South Africa, I did a lot of work and I hope to maintain that we kind of leverage what the environment actually has to offer. So there was a lot of easily access to cheetahs, so we could easily observe them. So it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Hard work, but fun work.
Yeah.
Okay, so, you learned a bunch about how the cheetah moves, how its body works. How do you then translate that into better bio-inspired robots?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So, I mean, if you think of robotics on one side and biology on another side, robotics is definitely helping biology, but also we're learning stuff from the animal to provide insights to robotics. So one way is that often studying this really difficult problem, I guess in a way forces us to innovate and come up with new techniques of doing things. So one example is I was very interested in optimal control of this multi-body system with multiple contact points, and doing trajectory optimization on that was quite challenging because usually in previous methods, you would need to prescribe the contact order. So you need to say it needs to go left foot, then right foot, then in the air, then left. Whereas if a cheetah's doing a maneuver, it's kind of doing a spin or twisting and sliding.
Really complicated.
Yeah, so we actually ended up developing a novel technique for trajectory optimizations, which actually allowed the optimizer to choose the contact. So what's quite cool, like I said, is that what comes out of this is novel engineering systems. Another one I can mention is, I would say about 3/4 of a way through my PhD, up until that point, I built various robots with a inertial tail. So the idea, if you speak to anybody who's seen a cheetah, they will think, okay, the cheetah is a heavy tail and it uses its tail as balance. And talk about things like counterweight. But what we actually discovered by accident, I was invited by a veterinarian, Dr. Emily Lane, who was at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, to an autopsy of a cheetah. And up until that point, we had assumed it was about 10% of the mass because the other tail robotics work was done on lizards, and many people just assumed it needs to be heavy, to stabilize the body. And then, to my shock, once we took off the fur of the tail, all we were left behind was a really skinny tail. It's like as thin as my finger, and really most of the mass was situated at the base of the tail. And firstly, I was I panicked because I thought, oh my gosh, is my PhD down the drain?
Yeah.
But then I thought, because you see the cheetah's tail while it's running, it's really a lot of that volume. It's quite thick and it's made up of the fur. So we wondered if that was causing an aerodynamic drag that the cheetah could be leveraging. And I managed to get a few cheetah pelts and we put them in a wind tunnel in mechanical engineering. And we actually determined that I think up to 40% of the angular impulse that the cheetah can use for stabilization comes from the fact that it's moving at such high velocities, and it can use that drag for stabilization. So it's quite cool because it makes sense that the animal is really optimized for speed in so many different ways that it wouldn't want to carry around this heavy thing.
Yeah.
It could leverage off the free force that's happening around it. Anyway, so that sort of spurred, there's been quite a few robots now that are using aerodynamic tails as opposed to inertial tails, which is great because you can save on battery, and then you can just leverage the fact that you're moving fast and you can use the tail as a rudder in a sense. So yeah, that's another way that I think biology has given back to robotics.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a really interesting audience question, which was submitted on the website, which was, why do you think we can learn from cheetahs to design better robots? A cheetah is an animal with muscles whose principles are totally different from the rigid body robots we have nowadays. I don't see a connection between cheetahs and robots, as one is soft and the other is rigid.
That's a good question. I guess I can answer this in two ways. The one is, if you're trying to design something that is maneuverable and agile, which our future robotic systems are going to have to respond to things very quickly when they move beyond the safety of a lab. You'd want to look at the most agile animal, as a way to see what are the extremes and what are the limits to legged maneuverability. So I think the cheetah is a great model for that. And then the second part is 100% agree. If I was doing biomimicry and biomimetics, that we would need muscles, maybe soft actuators. But what we're really trying to do is bio-inspiration more. We're really trying to just extract and understand the principle of what it's doing. So yes, the tail is definitely made up of tendons and it can, do very complex motions. But during the turns, the tail is actually kept remarkably straight. To maximize the inertia and the aerodynamic force, you'd want a big area. So when I'm designing a robotic tail, I don't actually need a flexible tail if I want to turn. I just need something that's rigid that I can flick around.
Right,
so yeah, I think being able to extract the principles is the goal here from this really the extreme case of maneuverability.
Yeah. But also, soft robotics is a huge growing field now. I know there are people working on robotic muscles and it's not completely out of the realms of possibility that we could be building more soft, muscular, cheetah-like robots in the future, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things that's missing from our robotic systems is the fact that, animal muscles and the actuation is just so robust. I think a lot of the control and disturbance rejection happens at the actuator level already before the central nervous system can respond. So yeah, I think having much more robust actuators like the soft actuators that some of our colleagues are working on are definitely the key for future agility in robotic systems.
Yeah. So you mentioned some robots that have tails and the fact that people are now designing robot tails that are inertial rather than, I've forgotten the other word you said.
So aerodynamic as opposed to inertial.
Yeah. I haven't seen very many robots with tails.
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So I always get this question is why does our Boston Dynamics Spot not have a tail or one of the Unity robots? And I think the answer is that, we haven't really pushed those robots to their limits. And I think when you're really on the boundaries of stability, because I think there's a very interesting paradox where in order to achieve maneuverability, you need to allow a certain amount of instability. In the same way fighter jets are by design unstable so that they can be rapidly maneuverable. But in order to do that, you need good stabilization. And I think that's one of the principles that we've kind of learned from the cheetah is that when you are being rapid or you are having to do a very quick agile maneuver, you're going to need stabilization. And an easy way to do that is with another appendage, right? So is with a tail, or I've seen some people use an arm, like a manipulator on top of it as a tail as well. So yeah, definitely you can do that. But I think, for a Boston Dynamics robot that's inspecting an oil rig, or
Yeah.
it's not really going to be of benefit.
Yeah, fair enough. But one kind of robot that springs to mind when you talk about like being inherently unstable is humanoids, right? Like they are constantly having to balance and stabilize themselves. Maybe more humanoid robots should have tails.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, obviously, within reason, you'd want to think about, you wouldn't want it to whack somebody.
Yeah, that's true.
I remember when I did my first paper for my PhD was at IROS, and we had a car and a tail, a robot teamer. And I remember like some of the first articles written about that were like, oh, if one car is going to have tails, like, no, not quite, but yeah.
Yeah. So I know that you're not trying to make a biomimetic robot cheetah, but what do you think would be the biggest technical challenges, but also kind of gaps in our understanding scientifically that would make that not possible right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I said it earlier, but like actuation is definitely a thing. If you think about, I think the central nervous system has a sampling rate of, say, 10 hertz or something. Like there's so much delay from the time your neurons fire in your brain till it gets to the actual limb. So it's not the control, because we can run our controllers at like tens of kilohertz, right?
Yeah.
It's not sensing. We can put so many sensors around our robots. Our actuators, I think the power density of like electric motors are well surpassed that of muscles actually. So I think what happens is it's the inherent stability that you get from a soft actuator with damping. So there's been some cool work by Alexander Sprowitz's group at Max Planck, who's been showing that just having a damper, in line with a legged robot makes it like so much more stable.
Right,
and that kind of like builds on the fact that, muscles have damping, and that inherently has a little bit of feedback to prevent instability. So yeah, I think that's the future, is if we can crack soft, strong actuators, that will be amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked about like the journey that began with your PhD and this kind of unexpected journey that you've been on, trying to figure out how cheetahs work and take some insights from them. What are you working on now, and what's next?
Yeah, so I'm really fascinated with the idea of using techniques from robotics to measure and understand what the wildlife are actually doing not in a lab, like in the field. And we've done some really cool recent work where we've looked at, combining some of the automotive LiDARs, so the solid state LiDARs, with high speed telephoto imagery to do long range 3D motion capture. Systems called WildPose. So those are the kinds of things that I'm really looking at getting more into wildlife. And the other thing I'm quite passionate about right now is to see if we can develop sensor fusion methods to assess whether wildlife was sick.
Okay. Yeah.
So I kind of got obsessed with this idea during lockdown of zoonotic diseases. And I spoke to a few game rangers at sandparks in South Africa, where lions often get, things like canine distemper or rabies or TB, tuberculosis, and they don't have any way of actually, knowing when animals are sick.
Yeah.
It's either they find an animal that's busy dying, or, they maybe sample the droppings. But so at the moment, I'm kind of really focused on trying to understand how we can develop systems that can assess things like, respiration rate or heart rate or body temperature from a camera trap. So that's my latest obsession.
Okay. See, now I'm kind of imagining like a robot that wanders around in the wild, whether that's like in a park in London or in the Serengeti or whatever, and just monitors the wildlife and like blends in because it's bio-inspired.
Yeah, I think that would be a really cool idea. I've discussed that with my colleague, Professor Demetrios Kanoulis.
Oh, I've had him on the podcast before.
Oh, yeah. He's done some great work with, he's really, really amazing at legs robotics. And yeah, we're starting to think about that, like using the legs robotic platform as something that can provide environmental sensing, that can move around and hopefully is non-invasive. There's very limited data on how wildlife react two-legged robotics systems. So that would be interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a YouTube channel I follow, which I think was part of a BBC series where they were making robotic animals that were primarily designed to like look the part.
I think I've seen it as well.
Yeah, and then they've got a camera and they're filming. So it's like a wildlife documentary shot from the perspective of another animal in the... Yeah, really cool. Some of those robots did make quite grisly ends, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, Amir, it's been lovely chatting to you today. I've been talking to Amir Patel from University College London. Thank you.
Yes, bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy Robot Talk, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the podcast, subscribe, and leave a review. And make sure you check out the awesome new Robot Talk merch that I've created by visiting robottalk.org/shop. Next week, I'll be speaking to Raizan Abu Aisha from the University of Bristol about our relationship with robot swarms. Until then, I've been Claire Asher, and this has been Robot Talk. Robot Talk Season 6 is sponsored by the Hamlin Centre, Imperial College London.